Ladies and gentlemen, you know him. He's on RT. He's a New Yorker. I don't know if he's a Mets or a Yankees fan. He's a real cool guy. He was in the Terminator 2. You know him. Caleb Maupin's here. How you doing, Caleb Maupin? I keep on saying Maupin with an L. Maupin.
How are you? I'm good.
It's great to have you on, man. So great to have you on. Are you Yankees or Mets?
I'm not a sports guy.
Hey! That's the winning answer.
Well, we couldn't get Karl Marx on today, so we had to get the next best thing. Caleb's with us.
So, you know, a lot of people have been asking us to have you on too, because they're like, oh, you know, he talks so well when it comes to Marxist theory and socialism. And, you know, we've seen you on RT and we've seen you do some great reporting. So I wanted to get your take on a lot of things, because we're at a pivotal moment right now where we're being censored, you know, and not just us, but independent media as a whole. And if we're not being censored, we're being maligned and we're being completely just divided. And it's not the same type of woke division that the Democratic Party is talking about, like, oh, we need to unite and come together. I'm talking about we're being divided against each other by the establishment, and we're so busy fighting, especially the left amongst themselves, than we are tackling the very real issues that we have. So this censorship via big tech, via Silicon Valley, via congressional members like AOC, it is extremely strong. What do you think about the way she's handled the censorship issue in terms of the press release, or the letter that she sent, that her campaign sent to several people, and in terms of her push to really go after right-wing domestic terrorists?
Well, look, I mean, if you're a socialist, you're a progressive, you're somebody who's opposed to the big corporations and monopolies, giving them the power to silence their critics, and giving them the authority to choose what opinions are valid and what are not, seems like the last thing you would ever want to do. I've met AOC before. She seems like a nice person with good intentions, but I think she's just dead wrong on this. I am very disturbed by the tech crackdown, all the channels being taken down, demonetized right now. And look, even what's going on with Marjorie Greene. Look, I don't agree with her on anything practically. I'm listening to her talk, but it sets a really dangerous precedent. It really sets a precedent. Look, I mean, we've had crackpots in Congress for years. How many Ku Klux Klan members were there in the U.S. Congress? You know, how many right-wing, you know, folks with awful views have there been in Congress? If the Democrats are upset about Marjorie Greene and her QAnon stuff, how about they enact progressive policies and motivate people to vote for them instead of people like her? I mean, this is a strange time in American politics. It's like the Democrats are so committed to not enacting progressive economic policies and not raising people in this country out of poverty, not repaving our roads, not fixing up our crumbling power plants and infrastructure, not building high-speed railway, not giving people the income they need and fighting for American jobs. They're so committed to not defending the American working class that it's like they'll think of anything, any other possible way we could win. Censor the internet, make a law against the other party. I mean, this is ridiculous. Just govern, for goodness sake. Statecraft, basic leadership.
Yeah, I would, you would think that somebody like Marjorie Greene would be a gift to, like, say, okay, oh, look who they're running. Let's push forth some policy and really take over Congress. But they're so bad themselves that they stay so distracted. Like, they spend all this time talking about this freshman congresswoman who has like zero power. But let's get back to the topic at hand, because you're on RT right now, so you guys are a target, and you also have your own channel. How do we, independent media, navigate through this crisis, especially in the age of Julian Assange and what happened to him, and the Russian misinformation, or whatever they're calling it nowadays? I mean, you got to be a little scared right now yourself.
I'm scared for the short term, but not for the long term. because you got to compare this historically. This is a lot like when the printing press was brought to Europe. The printing press was invented on the Korean Peninsula, eventually in China. It ends up in Europe. You have Gutenberg. And, at first the Roman Catholic Church, they controlled the printing press, this new invention, and it was great. And everyone could just, all the little villages could have their little village Bible, and it was all great, and they could print their indulgences. But pretty soon, the printing press got into the hands of critics of the Roman Catholic Church and critics of the feudal order in Europe. And it was only a matter of time before that same technology was being used by the forces that brought about the Protestant Reformation, which eventually led to the overturning of feudalism and the rise of the modern nation state and capitalism. And that when, social media was invented, sure, social media at this point is still in the hands of the tech monopolies, Silicon Valley, but it's only a matter of time before, there are alternative platforms coming out of different parts of the world. And the more they tighten their grip, the more they make it impossible for certain views to be heard on social media on the regular platforms that exist, the more soon it's going to be before other platforms spring up. Their monopoly is going to be broken. And it's only a matter of time. And when you see, the pressure that they put on Mark Zuckerberg and others, what that's about is Mark Zuckerberg knows this, right? I mean, his hero is Emperor Caesar Augustus of ancient Rome. This guy knows world history and he knows what's happening. And he's trying to not expedite the process. The more he tightens his grip, pretty soon Facebook is not going to have its monopoly anymore. And the same goes for YouTube and Twitter and all the other ones. And this is how it works. This is just the natural process of history taking its course. And I think the tech monopolies know that, and they've been somewhat reluctant to do what the powers that be want them to do because they don't want to speed up the process of them losing their monopoly. This is, you read in Marx, he talks about when new technology is introduced, pretty soon the competitors get their hands on it as well. This is the natural process of how capitalism and technology operate.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Quick? Well, I mean, I hope that is true, Caleb, but I don't think it is. I mean, because they own the satellites, the elites, right? I mean, they had Parler, they went to a different platform, and all of a sudden they were able to shut them down. And when they're this powerful, you know what I'm saying? They have the satellites, they have all the means to slow people down. How do we break through that?
Well, like I said, I'm very afraid of the short term. Because right now it's a very painful moment, and the future, the short-term future, the next year or two, I think is going to be very, very dark, and the censorship is only going to escalate. But that censorship is eventually going to lead to a break in their monopoly, and it will inevitably lead that direction. That is going to be the ultimate outcome. Look how crazy they went about TikTok. I mean, TikTok bent over backwards to not be available on the Chinese mainland, so there wouldn't be any Chinese government censorship. TikTok, despite being a Chinese company, is full of stuff about Hong Kong and Tibet and anti-Chinese government stuff, anti-communist stuff. That didn't stop, the government, Democrats and Republicans, from just flipping out against TikTok because they know what it stands for, right? The computer revolution was started in Southern California, and it was started strategically. The market wasn't going to create it. We know that there was a strategic decision made by mainly the liberal wing of the CIA, the Brzezinski folks. They realized that this was an area the United States could invest in and beat the Soviet Union. The Soviets didn't have the resources to fund computer research. So the NSA and the CIA and the intelligence agencies loaned lots of money and eventually built Silicon Valley for strategic reasons during the Cold War. And that put the United States at the center of a technological revolution. However, it's only a matter of time. I mean, already countries around the world, they have their own media, they've got their own platforms, and it's only a matter of time before Silicon Valley loses this global monopoly. And in the end, things are going to change in the long term. And this is almost the desperation of them realizing this will happen in the long term. The short term is going to be painful, no doubt.
Hope he's right, fam. I hope you're right, Caleb.
I mean, history kind of can tell us a lot about what will happen in the future. But also, you mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene and how that could set a precedent. I wanted to go a little bit deeper on that because the fact that they're removing her from committees, could that potentially come back and bite Democrats, in the butt next time when let's say we lose or Democrats lose the House or the Senate, and they want to remove a Democrat because, you know, there's that whole tit for tat mentality that goes on, this whole political theatrics that both parties put up in front of the people. Do you think that could potentially set off like a whole, like, well, if we lose the majority, then maybe they're going to keep doing this? Same with Trump's impeachment, you know, like, it's all these things keep coming back to bite you.
There is a long history of progressive dissidents in the House of Representatives. During the 1930s, Vito Marcantonio represented Harlem in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he put up the anti-lynching bill. He was a close friend of the Communist Party. He never actually joined. He was with the American Labor Party, and he put up the anti-lynching bill. He proposed all kinds of progressive legislation. He raised the alarm about the Nazis and the danger of fascism. And he was constantly accused of being a traitor, of being an agent of Stalin or whatever, but he was in the House of Representatives. Look at Bella Abzug and her record when it came to fighting for women's rights and opposing the Vietnam War. Look at Cynthia McKinney and the role that she played. And if you set this precedent where somebody gets elected, and nobody disputes that Marjorie Taylor Greene won the election. She won the election. But somebody gets elected, they go to Congress, but because of their views, they are treated as not a legitimate member of the body.
Yeah.
That could really, really come back to hurt legitimate progressive forces who challenge the powers that be. I mean, let's talk about the reality of the situation here. We're mad at Marjorie Taylor Greene, supposedly, because she's promoting conspiracy theories, QAnon, you know, laser beams from space or whatever. Well, I know a conspiracy theory that was promoted by Joe Biden when he was in the U.S. Senate, that was promoted by almost all of Congress. It was called weapons of mass destruction. Yep. And they promoted this lie, this conspiracy theory that Saddam Hussein was trying to build an atomic bomb or weapons of mass destruction. And that conspiracy theory didn't lead to people breaking some windows on Capitol Hill. It led to the nation of Iraq being bombed and destroyed and millions of people being displaced, hundreds of thousands of deaths. So if we're going to take retribution against members of Congress for promoting conspiracy theories that potentially inspire someone to do something dangerous, maybe, how about we take, you know, some retribution for that? Because the disastrous consequences of the weapons of mass destruction conspiracy theory are not disputable.
Yeah. I love the term weapons of mass distraction. I think Al Sharpton said it, but it was just a big nothing burger. And like you said, it led to the whole Middle East being put on fire. And I really think that they're going after Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's talking about elections. She's like one of those people who won't let it down. She's not accepting the results, and that's the big threat. They still want to silence any talk about the elections or the election process and how bad it is. But digressing back to what we talk about, you know, apart from these discords, we've seen the left as usually, you know, eating itself a lot. You're a socialist of sorts. Do you see it in any way positive that the left should interact with like libertarians or conservatives to try to get things done? Because you're one of those guys who goes out there and speaks to everybody.
You know, I have been raising the alarm about libertarianism and how it is an ideological danger, you know, for a long time. When I was in college, I was interested in socialism and Marxism and all of that. And I would meet, you know, there are people that I went to college with who were the most normal, straight-laced, conservative, Republican, evangelical conservatives, never had a dissident thought, supported every war, supported everything. And then one day they would wake up and they would say, you know, the wars are wrong. You know, the government is lying to us. And they would wake up and say, and the problem is we don't have real capitalism. And the problem is America is a communist country already, and we need to restore the republic. And I saw this and it made my head spin, because I'm here saying, yes, the wars are wrong. Yes, the government is full of lies. And that's because it's run by billionaires and bankers. And we need an economy that serves the people, where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. We need society to control the means of production. I was a Marxist. And so when I saw people waking up, but waking up wrong, I said that something needs to be done about this. We need to address this. And the answer I got from so many leftists was, no, just build the movement. You know, let's just build our little peace rallies or whatever. Let's focus on doing our own thing. Whatever the Democrats are doing, we just do it slightly louder, and that'll address it. And I said, no, there's a real problem here. And look, the reality is all across the United States, there are millions of people in red states and even in some blue states who they wake up, they realize the government is lying. They realize that we're having our civil liberties stripped away, but there is no Marxist or leftist voice there to point them ideologically towards socialism. Instead, their response is, it's the natural response. The right-wing ideology is out there, so they turn to right-wing libertarian and paleo-conservative views to explain the crisis. Well, the answer is we need to get to these people, refute their arguments, win them to socialism. The answer is not to just cancel these people, to just say you're a Nazi, you're Scott. It's like at first it seemed the left was unconcerned about this rising ideological threat. Then now their response to it is just this childlike castigation, cancel culture, and these people all become deplorables. And it's like, no, there is a real issue here. Let's talk about ideology. Let's find out what these people believe, where we share common views, but also where they are dead wrong. I mean, this is just basic. When it comes to ideology, some people have one ideology, you have your ideology, you engage with them and promote your own views, and maybe you learn something in the process. This is pretty basic politics, but it seems like so much of what the left is doing in our time is just defending the status quo from right-wing opposition. That's really what it's gotten down to, that the right wing in this country is far more well established, deep roots in communities, the John Birch Society, conservative, paleo. There's a huge right wing apparatus, and the mainstream of the establishment is threatened by it. So the left, we're just supposed to be their useful idiots and go along with them and kind of securing the status quo from this right wing opposition. Well, this right-wing opposition is wrong and doesn't have the answers, but the status quo is wrong and failing, and that's why this right-wing opposition is growing. The answer is a left alternative, but that has been forgotten. And this cancel culture atmosphere, this shrill, it's almost like people are being trained to believe that if you actually are a leftist, that makes you on the right. It's like there is no left-wing criticism of the status quo being tolerated. It's very scary.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to touch on that a little bit more because I consider myself a leftist libertarian. And the only reason why I say that is because I don't believe in the fiscal policies of a libertarian. I tend to lean more towards the socialist policies about, we're on Rokfin right now. It's a co-op, and I love it. I think it's one of the greatest things out there. And I want workers, when I hear people say communism, I don't get like my mom or my aunt where they go, oh my God, communism. I think like workers' rights, and I think socialism is social safety nets. But the political left, and including a lot of DSA members and the DSA mechanisms itself, they have like this authoritarian streak in them. And as a leftist libertarians, I feel right now in government, it's only the libertarians really that are protecting our civil liberties. And I think that's one of the most important things. They're one of the only group out there that is anti-regime change. They're like, they don't want to invade any countries whatsoever. And they're like one of the only groups out there that are pushing for fair elections. So isn't there something that we can have? Because I've heard you say before, when America moves to its form of socialism, it's going to be its certain brand of socialism. So isn't there something good to take out of the libertarian movement?
Look, I think libertarians have really tapped into kind of the motor-mindedness of Americans. We have always been a country of entrepreneurs. We've always been a country of people who want to go out there and achieve their dreams and get something going. And that part of the reason the Eastern Bloc fell is that there was a strata in those societies, college professors, scientists, teachers, who were just feeling stifled by the system, and that it was by kind of hijacking the grievances of those individuals that the CIA and Brzezinski and Soros were able to kind of manipulate the unrest that brought down and led to the color revolutions that toppled the Eastern Bloc. Well, if you look at what China is doing right now, but also what Vietnam is doing, what Cuba is doing, and you go to Venezuela, Bolivia, they have a big market sector. People start their own businesses. They have their own restaurants and hotels and tech companies, etc. But at the same time, you have state central planning. You have, management of the economy to make sure that the irrationality of profits in command doesn't get out of control. And I think that a lot of libertarians, they're libertarian in the sense because they want to go out there. They want to achieve their dreams. They don't want to be stuck working in a government steel mill for the rest of their life. And so I can understand why it kind of takes hold. And I think we need to make clear that socialism is not about, making people poorer so it's fair. Socialism is about rationally organizing the economy so that growth is no longer restrained and human reason and human progress can be raised to higher levels than ever. That is the goal of socialism. I mean, ultimately, the ultimate higher stage of communism that Karl Marx spoke about is only possible when there's a huge expansion of material wealth in the world. He talks about a world where there is so much wealth that exists that people only work because they feel like working. Where you can live according to his own ability, each according to their needs, right? I mean, and this is based on a high level of material abundance. And I think that understanding, if people could get that, if we could organize the economy rationally. I mean, the problem with capitalism is that in capitalism, abundance creates poverty. In systems of the past, people were hungry because there wasn't enough food. Well, now under capitalism, people are hungry because there's too much food. In the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. Well, capitalism creates a situation where people are homeless because there's too much housing. That's what happened in 2008 when the housing bubble burst. There were houses everywhere and people couldn't afford to keep buying them. And the mortgage ripoff schemes from Alan Greenspan only worked out so longer. And people, I remember 2008, 2009, there were tent cities. All kinds of people across the United States after the economy crashed became homeless because there's too much housing. That is not a rational system. And that's capitalism. And that's the irrationality of profits running your economy. The banking system, the healthcare, the major centers of economic power, your major oil wells, your major natural resources, these things should be public property so that we can strategically plan out the economy so that growth is no longer held back by this insane boom bust cycle of the economy. And technology can advance and human prosperity can advance at the same time. We don't kill jobs by inventing more efficient ways to produce things. I mean, this is the Marxist vision. This is what Marx talked about in Capital. There's this crude understanding of what socialism is that we all get in school, that socialism is when the government divides up everything equally so it's fair. And that's just ridiculous, right? That socialism is about, the means of production, the centers of economic power being controlled by society so that human reason and growth can greatly expand.
Yeah, I think a lot of the fear that comes from Americans who haven't been exposed to socialism is the authoritarian streak that they feel like is going to take over big central government. I think that there's that line where, people draw. Like, I consider myself pretty, very, very far left, but also I don't want people infringing on, privacy, on censorship, on any of these things. But the thing is, that is possible under socialism. It's just people haven't been exposed. They've gotten socialism from a very whitewashed version that is not really accurate. Would you say that organizations like DSA hurt or actually help the idea of socialism?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. Okay, let's just talk about where DSA came from. Okay, I think it's really important to talk about that. Michael Harrington, who was somebody who served in the administrations of Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy. He was a good friend of a guy named Max Shachtman, who ended up working with the CIA. And, when DSA was started in the 1970s, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, there were all kinds of deep state connected people involved in it. Gloria Steinem, right, the voice of feminism in the 1970s, she brags in her autobiography about how her career started with the CIA and the Central Intelligence Agency. And that basically what was happening in the 1970s was there was a huge upsurge of radical and anti-imperialist and anti-war feeling, and that the DSA represented a wing of the American deep state that shared some of those sentiments, but also wanted to control some of those sentiments and keep them from going towards sympathy with China or the Soviet Union or communist countries. So DSA was kind of set up, and it has roots and ties to the intelligence apparatus of the United States. That said, though, there are a lot of great people in DSA. I mean, I have friends who are in DSA, and if I'm a journalist, I cannot join any political organization because that would hinder my objectivity. But if I were not, I might join the DSA just because it would be a great place to meet people and to talk to people and engage with people about socialism. I think that probably the biggest problem with the DSA, in my view, is that it's kind of changed the definition of socialism to the socialism is the government giving people free stuff, right? And that's not what socialism is. I mean, every country in the world has some form of wealth redistribution. I mean, there's roads outside of the building I'm in Those roads were built by money that was redistributed from people like me who pay our taxes, right? That doesn't mean New York City is a socialist country. That there's some level of wealth redistribution, government providing services in every country and always has been. Socialism is a whole new economic system where profits are not in command. And I think that understanding has been lost. And I'm kind of disappointed that DSA has done that. It seems like, the Tea Party, they accused Barack Obama of being a socialist and said Barack Obama wants to tax and spend. He wants to tax you and give people free stuff with your money. And the DSA seems to have said, yep, that's what socialism is. And that's a good thing. Well, that's not what socialism is. That's something that goes on in every society.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to come join some of my Thanksgiving dinners in New York when I get out there, man, because we start having to talk about this subject and I just get my ass kicked.
Yeah.
I got a lot of conservative family members out there and stuff.
One of the questions, if you want to go into it, like how do you talk to a conservative?
Well, yeah, how do you talk to a conservative, whatnot? Because, every single time I talk to my mother and, she's like, and my aunt, it's like, socialism's awful and stuff. And then we'll start talking about, well, look at this success, communist Russia had for so many years and whatnot. And she's like, well, look how Stalin got power. Look what he did to Trotsky. Look what he did to Lenin. He had him executed. That's not, that's not a free society. What do you say to these people? How do you talk to them? Because like I said, when I think communism, I think workers' right. I think socialism, I think about social safety nets. So how do I persuade these people the way Fred Hampton did and said, if you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself?
Indeed. I mean, I think when you're talking about the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union or Cuba or, countries around the world that have adopted a socialist system, it's important to point out that they've adopted it on the basis of extreme scarcity and poverty. These are countries that were dominated by Western corporations and not able to industrialize. They never really had abilities to build up their own economies until they had revolutions and kicked out American and British capitalism and started building up their own economies. And they were building socialism on the basis of extreme scarcity. And at the same time they were doing that, they were been attacked and invaded. 15 different countries invaded Russia after the Russian Revolution. 15 different countries. There were even some American troops there. A lot of people don't know that, but we sent our military to Russia to try and put down the Bolshevik Revolution. And in an atmosphere of, being blockaded, being unable to import medicine, having 15 different foreign armies, authoritarianism tends to develop. When people are facing an onslaught in a military situation, in a blockade, you get authoritarian tendencies that develop. When societies are open and prosperous, you tend to have more freedom. And when societies are under attack and fighting for their lives and locked down, that's when authoritarianism begins to develop. Originally in the Soviet Union, there were 3 political parties that all recognized the Soviet Constitution. But eventually, as things intensified, there was only one party. And then eventually there was a ban on factions within that party. And that was based on the fact that they were fighting for their lives. And socialism, as it has emerged in the world, in the developing countries, it has in some ways been very distorted by the fact that it was countries that were in the developing world that were under attack, fighting for their lives. That has kind of distorted the nature of the socialism that emerged. But the goal is a society of prosperity and abundance. The goal is a society in which there is more freedom than we can even imagine. The goal of socialism and Marxism is a world that is so prosperous, the state is not even necessary. And people can just take what they want and do what they feel like doing. A world with technological abundance and prosperity. Let's face it, here in the United States, we haven't always been as free as we are now. It wasn't, really until the 1960s that we got anywhere near the level of freedom of speech that we have now. And that's mainly because the USA became so abundant during that period. Economic prosperity and economic development is kind of the basis of human rights. The way we're taught to think about human rights in the United States, we think of human rights as if every society in all of history should have the exact same level of freedom that we have right now. That's not how it works. Nobody was talking about freedom and human rights until like Europe in the 1400s. And you know why? Because no society had reached that level of economic development before. Try running an agrarian subsistence economy like, they had in the Middle Ages with everyone being able to say whatever they want and do whatever they want. No, economic development, stability in society leads to more freedom. And that is, you'll notice China, as it has gotten more prosperous, has gotten more free. And they've often pointed out that human rights and freedom are very much tied to economic development, and that these things don't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah. So a lot of people in progressive media, in AOC, were not supportive of the force to vote. Like, they didn't even consider it a direct action. They were saying that we needed to wait till the right moment. I was a huge proponent of force to vote. We went to DC, we covered it. It was crazy that we had more cops surrounding us and we're at the Capitol on January 6th, but that's an aside. But these criticisms ended up being more focused on Jimmy Dore, ended up being more focused on the personalities pushing force to vote rather than the actual issue. How do you, for somebody, that's looking at this from a Marxist perspective, was force to vote a direct action? And would you say that it was a waste of time? Would you say it was an important moment that needed to happen?
No, I mean, I think it was a great idea. Let's, use this moment when we're having a pandemic to make people put their money where their mouth is, show who's really for Medicare for all and who isn't. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I found force the vote to be fine. I remember, I'm a fan of Jimmy Dore. I listen to Jimmy Dore here and there. And, and I remember I got on Twitter one day and it said trending Jimmy Dore. And I thought, oh, that must just be like trending for me because I listen to his stuff. No, it was trending for all of Twitter. And I clicked on, Jimmy Dore and I saw him being cursed out and he's a Nazi and he's a fascist and he's a crypto Trumper. And I'm seeing this and I'm like, did this guy murder somebody? Did we discover that he's responsible for 9/11? Like, what did he do? And it's just, he's just wanting to force the vote. And it's like, why is there no tolerance for dissent? On the right, look, the Republicans, they can have Lindsey Graham and they can have Marjorie Taylor Greene, but on the left, it's like from DSA to Biden. I mean, you have to march in lockstep, and you can't say, "Hey, let's force the vote." I really find that disturbing, right? I mean, it seems like there is an opening on the right to dissident views, but the left has become so lockstep and uniform, and everyone who doesn't agree gets accused of being, some kind of awful, despicable, cancelable human being. And I mean, it's a very strange atmosphere, I must say.
Yeah. Well, you just exposed yourself as a doorknob, buddy. Now that we know you like Jimmy Dore, you doorknob, Caleb. Let me ask you this one, though. From your perspective, can you explain how one could possibly twist a Marxist theory into voting for Joe Biden? Because we have these clowns out there, and I'm going to call them what they are, like Vosh and others, you know what I'm saying, who have taken to the theory, combined it with, this Marxist theory combined with, let's reform the Democratic Party. Let's get these bourgeois lefts to do what we need them to do. Can you somehow square that circle for us?
Well, look, okay, I mean, I can understand how, in some ways, Biden was better than Trump. In some ways. I mean, he was better on immigrant issues, I would say. He didn't preach anti-immigrant demagogy as much. And he also, he didn't seem to be as hostile to Muslims. And so those who are concerned about some specific issues might feel that Biden is better. But then again, Trump seemed less hawkish and less pro-war in a lot of ways. Trump seemed, less like he was, a supporter of the establishment and of the status quo in the United States. So my position was, I don't really know who's better in the 2020 election. But the notion that Biden and that voting for Biden is in any way going to get us closer to a socialist society is particularly outrageous. I mean, there's just, there's nothing socialist about Joe Biden at all. I mean, this is a man who is the establishment. He's like the walking incarnation of the very American establishment that those of us who are socialists and progressives should be trying to mobilize against. So I found that to be a little bit shocking. Look, there's so much confusion. And again, socialism is about building things up. It's about loving your community, loving your country, loving the world, and wanting to organize it rationally and march toward a better society where we don't have poverty and war and instability. But unfortunately, I feel like left-wing politics in a lot of ways has become attached to maybe the more adolescent and destructive impulses that some people have. There are some folks who, they really are angry at society. They're angry about injustice. Those destructive impulses, you might call them, the impulse toward aggression, that leftism has kind of become a space where we give people permission to unload their hate and their resentment and their anger. And people have a definite right to be angry. There's plenty to be angry about in the world, but that's not the essence of what socialism is. I mean, the essence of socialism is people coming together and building something new and building a whole new world. And the toxic atmosphere that we've seen, the cancel culture, the shrill accusations, that all seems to be kind of, really a result of the fact that so much of leftism has pushed deconstruction, right? The idea that we're going to take apart existing narratives. Well, Marxism does take apart existing narratives, but it replaces them with the Marxist narrative, with the dialectical and historical materialist understanding of human history. It's not simply a vehicle for deconstruction. Postmodernism is very different than Marxism. Postmodernism is the idea that there is no truth, that all historical narratives should be deconstructed. And postmodernism and Marxism are not the same thing. And a lot of what has been pushed in academia and kind of passes for socialist and Marxist thought is this kind of destructive, ideology that just tears things down and doesn't build anything up. And I think that can explain why there's so much confusion and shrillness on the internet.
Many people still lack an understanding of the relationship between imperialism and capitalism. Can you explain the connections of how imperialism is actually a system, specifically capitalism in its monopoly stage?
Sure, yeah. Well, a lot of people think imperialism is a verb, right? If a country attacks another country, they're engaging in imperialism, right? I've even heard people say they're imperializing. They put an IZE at the end of it. But imperialism ultimately refers to a system. It is capitalism in its highest stage and its monopoly stage. It's a global order where banks and corporations based in Western countries dominate the global economy. They make super profits by carving out developing countries as spheres of influence. The way I put it is that they keep themselves rich by making the world poor. And that is imperialism. And what's interesting is that for a long time, imperialism, you could say it benefited people in the United States and Britain and France and Germany. While they were impoverishing countries around the world, there was what you could call an aristocracy of labor in the homeland of well-paid industrial workers who, while the USA and Britain were colonizing the world, they kind of reaped some of the benefits. They got a few crumbs that trickled down to them. But the defining aspect of the period we are living in now is the demolition of that layer. The same thing that the Wall Street and London imperialists have done to Africa and Asia and Latin America, they are gradually starting to do now to Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana and Idaho and so many states throughout this country. They want one global, open international system where Wall Street reaps the profits and the rest of the world just gets poorer and poorer and poorer. They have a model of global trade that you can call Atlanticism, where rather than engaging in economic development, building infrastructure, they function as kind of the middleman in global trade, where everyone has to trade through them. We talk about the Roman Empire. They used to say all roads lead to Rome, meaning the Romans wouldn't let anyone build a road unless it was through them. And that seems to be the model where these big banks and corporations, nobody does business unless it's through them. And if you look at countries around the world that get targeted, they're generally competitors, right? Look, Wall Street is all about oil. Chase Bank is ExxonMobil, very much. HSBC Bank is BP. And look at the countries that get targeted, right? We got Russia, the world's top oil and natural gas producers. You got Venezuela, a huge oil producing country. You got Iran, another oil producing country. Barack Obama bombed and destroyed Libya, which was an oil producing country on the African continent. And before Barack Obama destroyed Libya, Libya had the highest life expectancy of any country on the African continent. Well, now it's joined the global free trade system, and it's had nothing but instability and chaos. Under Gaddafi's leadership, people were trying to get into Libya to get some of the oil benefits and the healthcare and education he was giving out. Now people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of Libya. Yeah. Now that it's joined the free trade system. Compare the peoples of Guatemala and Honduras, two free trade free market capitalist countries to Nicaragua, where the Sandinistas have been building up, healthcare and education, wiped out illiteracy, raised so many out of poverty. It's very clear that this global system of capitalism and the monopolies of big banks is not benefiting the world. We need an alternative mode of development based on building up economies, win-win cooperation. Imperialism in its current form, the system where a few banks and corporations dominate the world, can't continue.
Do you have a follow-up? Or?
Go ahead.
Well, let's talk about the Robin Hood situation right now, and the actual short squeeze that was stopped. I mean, I know you got to be licking your chops to talk about this because capitalism, it eventually, I think, turns into crony capitalism, and there's nothing you can do. When the little guy tries to get involved, he gets shut down. What's your overall thoughts about what had happened, and give us a little bit about what your take is?
Well, Marx referred to fictitious capital. That's the term that Marx used to refer to wealth that is not based on any material production, right? And that's basically what Wall Street is. This short selling, all this derivative. You talk about all of this. It's basically money being made from other money. These guys make money and nothing gets built, no product gets produced, no jobs are created. Right. They just make money from money. And when you do that, and when the physical economy of the country, that's, actual factories, actual infrastructure, actual wages, actual stores, when those things are being diminished, but the stock market is still rising, you're headed for a crisis. There's going to be a correction, right? The physical economy is the basis of economy. And this speculation stuff, this making money out of nothing, this is the kind of thing that leads to a big collapse. This is what Roosevelt tried to control, right? When he got into office and said he'd come to drive the money changers out of the temple, that's what Roosevelt was referring to. And we're in a situation in the United States where, there's some administrations trying to rein it in or regulate it one way or another, but the speculators and the fictitious capital is so out of control. Meanwhile, the actual physical economy of the United States, the neighborhoods throughout the country, the communities are devastated. Our roads aren't being paved. And in states across the country, they're actually unpaving roads. They have this device called a reclaimer where they rip up the asphalt and they pulverize it. And where you used to have a paved road, you have a dirt road. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you're unpaving the roads, that is not economic progress. I mean, we are seeing the diminishing of the actual physical economy of the United States. But during the Trump administration, the early years, the stock market was doing pretty well until the pandemic, because it seems like so much of the wealth of the people who control the economy is not based on things actually getting better. And when that is the situation, when the gap between Main Street and Wall Street just continues to rise and rise and rise, eventually there's a dramatic correction. And the longer you hold it off with artificial mechanisms, the bigger the crisis is going to be. And this is the basic, this is what Marx talked about. This is what he spent the pages of Capitals, volume 1, 2, 3, and 4 explaining. This is the natural laws of a system based on profits.
With everything that's happening now, with people being in total, complete desperation, losing jobs, losing their health care through their jobs, losing their homes. We're seeing another economic depression. We're also seeing that combined with a pandemic that hasn't happened in over 100 years. So with all of that, what does the left or the anti-establishment populist movements that are arising, what needs to happen for there to be a general strike, for there to be a workers' movement actually engaging in direct action to push the government? Because it seems like just engaging electorally is no longer enough.
Well, I think the problem right now is an ideological one. For years, I was an activist and I said, we need to get out in the streets. We need more people in the streets. And look, right now, there's all kinds of protesting going on all throughout this country around a lot of, very important issues about the police state and repression, about, climate change and such. But the issue is not that we need more protests. I mean, the issue is an ideological one. The issue is that there are millions of people in this country who are losing their jobs, who are losing their homes, who are struggling to pay their bills and feed their kids during this pandemic. But they have no idea that capitalism is to blame. They have no idea that socialism doesn't just mean raising their taxes, and that there is a big ideological problem. And we need to get back to the basic class struggle message. Go back to Eugene Debs. Go back to Gus Hall. Go back to the basic understanding that built the labor movement in this country, that some people own for a living, but the rest of us work for a living. And those of us who work for a living and sell our labor power, we have an alternative interest to those who own the factories and the banks and the big oil wells. And that class struggle is not a dirty word. And that we, the people, we produce the wealth of this world, and we ought to be the ones who organize it. And the wealth that's created should be, organized and allocated for the good of the country overall, not just for the good of a small group of owners and property owners. I mean, this basic understanding has been largely obscured and lost. The left seems to focus on identity politics, on tearing itself down or tearing people down. And I think we need to get out there that, if you love your country, if you are a patriotic American, you should be a socialist, right? Because right now capitalism is destroying America. It's destroying the rest of the world also, but it's destroying America. Look, I've tried to raise the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families, right? This notion that we've been told in the United States, the government is best, that governs least. We need to get away from that. We need a government that takes action on behalf of working families, right? A government of action. Think about the music of Bach and Beethoven. Think about the Sistine Chapel. All of this, all the beautiful things people talk about in the history of Western civilization came from the notion that the job of the government was to make people better, statecraft. The notion that the state has an obligation to make people smarter, to mobilize the population, to build things, to build a better world. This notion that the government should serve the people. This is what got us out of the Dark Ages. In the Dark Ages, they said, serfs and commoners, you exist to serve the king. You exist to serve the nobility. But, the Renaissance really began with a notion that the relationship doesn't go both ways, that the rulers had an obligation to serve the people and to point them towards something better, and to build up the country. And that was a game changer that really launched a whole spiral of events that have led up right up to today. We need to get back to the notion that the government shouldn't just do the dirty work of corporations, or it shouldn't just keep its hands off, that we can have state power to serve the people.
Yeah. Do you have any more questions, please? My last question is, how do we make that happen, Caleb? I mean, how do we get that message out there? Right now, socialism is such a dirty name. You know what I'm saying?
Not as much.
Not
like
to
what
us,
it used to be.
But, I mean, from the other side, trying to convince those people, those conservative people, that, hey, man, that's why I think we're so polarized and split. How do we change the game? How do we get this information out here? Because, I mean, I don't think anybody out there explains socialism like you do. I mean, there's not a lot of Caleb Maupins out there. So how do we find a way to move forward and get this great ideology out there?
Well, if we're ever going to get the American people in their millions to accept socialism, we're going to have to separate socialism from whatever this woke entity that has emerged is, right? We need to separate socialism from the crowds of people going around breaking windows and all of that. We need to get socialism away from what I call the synthetic left. I mean, there is this entity in the United States, the cancel culture entity, the people who've gone after you guys and gone after Jimmy Dore. And, that element, CNN, MSNBC, cancel culture, toxic element, that's something that a lot of average American people in their bones, they don't really care for. And if we're going to get the American people to accept socialism, we have to get them to understand that socialism is not a destructive ideology. I tell people, I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. I want to save the working families of this country from the greed of huge multinational corporations. I want to end racism. I want to, get rid of any kind of anti-LGBT bigotry or discrimination. I want to bring people together and start building. We need to start building in America again. Imagine if that motor-mindedness and creative spirit of Americans could be put to work, raising this country up and constructing. That's what I would like to see. And we need to get a constructive socialist message that is separate from the kind of destructive and toxic and pessimistic politics that speak in the name of leftism out there and put off a lot of people.
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on here and having this conversation. We could obviously talk to you for hours. We could have, next time we'll bring like a bottle of wine, and then we'll just like be talking Marxist theory forever. But no, really, thank you. Where can people find you, and where can they hear more about you?
Well, I've got my website, calebmaupin.com. That's CALEBMAUPIN.com. I got my books up for sale on various book-selling websites. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. I'm everywhere I can get my message out. You know, I don't know if they'll deplatform me or not, but if they do, I'll just keep going somewhere else. Right? They'll have to cut my tongue out if they want to silence me. So there you go.
Well, that's good. You should check out Rokfin. We're kind of like a socialist platform. It's a co-op and stuff. But really quick for the people out there, those the folks at Hard Lens Media. Caleb, question: what's better, New York pizza or Chicago pizza?
I am a New York pizza kind of guy. I really do. You know, there's something about it. It's got a unique flavor in the dough, and that's probably because of all the air pollution here.
It's good because of the water, though. We got great water coming in there. You know what I'm saying, from the Catskill Mountains. Exactly. Where do you go get a slice before the Corona hit?
I don't know. In my neighborhood, you know, I'm out in Bay Ridge, New York, and they have a few nice pizza shops out in Bay Ridge. But, you know, there's some good spots in Manhattan, too. You know, Patsy's Pizzeria, they claim they invented the pizza. There's another one that claims they invented it. There's a fight going on between them. But, yeah, Patsy's Pizzeria is a pretty good place to go and have a nice kind of classy pizza meal in New York City.
Are you thin or Sicilian?
I'm more of a Sicilian crust kind of.
Oh, yeah, here you go. That's me over there. Caleb Maupin is here with us, ladies and gentlemen. Caleb, thank you so much. Watch out for yourself over there. Take a look at Rokfin. It might be a great platform to come over with all the censorship.
And say hi to Putin for us, please.
Say hi to Vlad for us. Right. We love you, Caleb. Thank you.